Murder at Maple Leaf Stadium. This week, we dust off the bleachers, tape the bats, and try our best not to step on the chalk lines of history. July 1949. Maple Leaf Stadium. A summer night in Toronto where baseball fans packed the stands and dreams rose with every pitch. But for one-star slugger, the final run ended in silence. Johnny Jolt Jensen, the pride of the Leafs batting order, collapsed dead at home plate before the crowd's cheers even faded. At first they called it a heart attack, but the coroner had other ideas. And when Toronto's finest detectives, McCathie and MacNeely, arrived on the scene, they quickly discovered this wasn't a case of bad luck. It was murder. A coded notebook, a charming ex-ballplayer turned crooked bookie, a rising team owner with everything to lose, and a killer using baseball as a perfect cover. Welcome to Murder at Maple Leaf Stadium, a brand new episode of the Mick and Mack Mysteries, where foul balls turn fatal. The stakes are always higher than the scoreboard shows. Stay with us, because sometimes the deadliest plays happen off the field. Chapter 1. 7th Inning Snuff. Maple Leaf Stadium, Toronto, July 1949. The evening air over Lake Ontario shimmered with the smell of hot dogs, cigar smoke, and anticipation. Maple Leaf Stadium was packed to the rafters, nearly 10,000 strong. Toronto was leading 3-2 in the bottom of the 7th inning against the Newark Bears, and the crowd was rowdy with hope. The crack of the bat echoed like a rifle shot as Johnny Jolt Jensen set a screaming liner down the right field line. Jensen rounded first like a freight train on fire. By second, he had a smile on his face. By third, he was running on sheer bravado. And then, just as he thundered toward home, his knees buckled. For a split second, the stadium seemed frozen. Then the silence hit, like a vacuum. Jensen pitched forward, collapsing just shy of the plate in a cloud of dust and glory. The umpire blinked, the catcher stared, and 10,000 fans forgot how to breathe. By the time the medics reached him, the dust had settled and the cheers had turned to murmurs. Someone called for the team doctor, but Dr. Kendall, already seated behind the dugout, was making his way through the players with a grim look in his face and a thermos of coffee in one hand. He crouched beside the body, pressed 2 fingers to Jensen's neck, then sighed. He set the thermos down carefully beside the bat rack. "Gentlemen," he muttered, barely above the murmur of the crowd, "this wasn't a heart attack. This was poison." And later that night, McCathie adjusted his brown fedora against the wind sweeping off the lake. He stood just inside the player tunnel beneath the stadium bleachers, his coat collar turned up, eyes fixed on the shadows near the dugout. His partner, MacNeely, broader, blunter, and currently chewing on a toothpick like it owed him money, leaned against a cool concrete wall beside him. Chief Bernard Stewart's voice cut through the rumble of the cleaning crew, and muttered questions from panicked staff. "Keep this quiet," he said. "No headlines, not yet. I don't need Jocko Thomas writing a 4-column screamer before we got a handle on this. We clear?" "Crystal," said Mick, scanning the field. Her chalk lines were being redrawn as if that might scrub away the memory. "You got Dr. Kendall's confirmation?" Mack asked. Stewart nodded grimly. "Same poison as that poker game last year in Kensington. Fast acting. Slipped into something. Maybe water, maybe gum." Mack scratched his jaw. "Jensen chew?" "Like a chimney. Bubble gum, tobacco, toothpicks, sunflower seeds. If it went in a dugout, he chewed it." "I'll make a note," said Mick, already pulling out his leather-bound notebook. "Make this look like a routine inquiry," Stewart added, adjusting his trench coat. "Keep an eye on the press box. I saw Rosie DeLuca asking questions on the 3rd row before the stretcher left the field." "Oh, Reds is already ahead of us," Mack said. "If gospel was a ball game, she'd be batting cleanup." They found her on the concourse near the hot dog stand, red hair gleaming under the stadium lights, lipstick immaculate, and a cigarette dangling theatrically from her lips. She wore a navy polka-dot blouse tucked into a high-waisted skirt, and her handbag had already smacked two unsuspecting ushers who'd gotten in her way. "Well, it's about time you two showed up," she said, not bothering to turn when she heard them approach. "If I had a nickel for every time someone said, 'Jolt Jensen dropped dead,' I could buy the Leafs outright." "We missed you, Reds," Mick said dryly. "I don't miss sugar, I aim." She turned then, eyes flashing. "Where does he hit the dirt like a sack of potatoes and didn't twitch? Didn't even finish his slide. That's not a heart thing. That's a somebody made him stop breathing on purpose thing." Mack raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you hear that?" She tapped her temple. "I got ears in the bleachers and friends in the beer line." "Any of them see someone near him before he went up to bat?" "One guy said he saw the batboy hand him a fresh wad of gum just before he stepped out of the dugout. Strange, right? Jensen always kept his own stash." Mick and Mack exchanged a look. "That's strange," Mick agreed. "And useful." Reds winked. "Thought it might be. Since I'm feeling generous, I'll throw in a drink in the house next time you come by Rosie's." "Generous? Or fishing for info?" Mack asked with a grin. "Honey, I can do both. I'm talented like that." Mick scribbled something in his notebook. "Let's check with the batboy. Then maybe we'll swing by for that drink." "You better. This case stinks like bad peanuts in August." Chapter 2. A Clean Game? Maple Leaf Stadium, the morning after. The smell of stale beer and liniment hung in the air like a fog no one had bothered to sweep out with the peanut shells. By the light of morning, the stadium looked tired, like an old fighter between rounds. The banners still fluttered, the chalk lines still held, but the soul of the place had dimmed. McCathie paced slowly across the dugout, eyes in the shadows beneath a bench. Mack stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching a young pitcher nervously lace and unlace his cleats. "Start from the top," Mack said. "Don't skip anything. You wouldn't believe how many guys forget the part where they hand the gun to the guy who drops dead." The kid looked like he wanted to melt into his uniform. I didn't even see him before the inning. I was in the bullpen, I swear." "Relax, kid," Mick said, crouching to chuck a discarded tin of tobacco under the bench. "We're not looking to pin it on you. We're just trying to figure out who wanted Jensen out of the game, permanently." Over the next hour, Mick and Mack worked the clubhouse, like seasoned umpires, calling foul when they smelled it. They spoke to 5 players, 2 trainers, and a coach who couldn't stop pacing. Nobody cried over Jensen. A few muttered obligatory condolences, but most barely masked the relief. "Guy was a prima donna," said the shortstop, shaking his head. "Thought he was Joe DiMaggio with half the talent and none of the charm. Started telling the manager who should play where. That's when you know you've got trouble," added the catcher, spitting into a paper cup. "Didn't he just come up from Rochester?" Mick asked. "Yeah," said the manager, pulling out a lineup card with Jensen's name already scratched off. "Good riddance, too. He was poison. I just didn't expect it to be literal." By noon, Mick and Mack had a working theory, an armload of names who wouldn't be sending flowers. Still, it was mostly friction, ego, and baseball politics, till the equipment manager mentioned something that made Mick stop writing mid-sentence. "There was a guy loitering around the clubhouse yesterday," the man said, tugging at his undershirt. "Didn't belong there. Slick suit, hat tilted just so." "Did he look like he had odds in the game?" Mack asked. "He looked like he set the odds," the man replied. "He asked where Jensen was staying. I told him to beat it." "Anyone else see him?" Mick asked. The man nodded toward the far end of the hallway. "Ask Louie. He never forgets a face, especially when it's shady." Louie, a retired shortstop turned locker room attendant, squinted at a photo they dug up of a known associate of Manny the Hat Kaufman, a bookmaker with a grin like a meat slicer. "Yeah, that's the guy," Louie said, tapping the photo. "Says his name was Mr. Dolan. Left a lousy tip." Mick folded the photo. Let's keep that between us for now. Mack cracked his knuckles. Man, he's starting to show up like a bad penny. That evening they found Rosie Red's DeLuca behind the bar of Rosie's, her tavern on Queen Street, just a few blocks from the stadium. The walls were covered in autographed baseballs, cracked bats, an occasional photograph of Reds herself, usually giving the camera a look that dared it to blink first. She was shaking a cocktail like it owed her money and arguing with the regular about the infield fly rule. I don't care what the rulebook says, she said. If a man can't catch a pop-up, he's got no business in cleats. She spotted Mick and Mack and slid the drinks to her customer without breaking stride. Well, she purred. If it isn't Toronto's two favorite gumshoes, come to order a round or stir up some trouble. Little of both, Mack said, easing onto a stool. You always were greedy. In a quiet corner booth, Reds lit a cigarette and nodded toward the back room. Bartender overheard Jensen talking 2 nights ago. Said he thought someone was tailing him. Was he? Mick said. Hard to say, Red said, but he stopped coming here for his usual drink. Switched to soda. Say he needed to keep his head clear. Clear for what? Mack asked. He didn't say, but he left in a hurry and looked like he'd seen a ghost. Or a bookie. Did he mention a name? Mick asked. Reds blew a smoke ring. No, but he said something about not wanting to end up like Martin down in Baltimore. Mick and Mack exchanged a look. Martin? Mack asked. Reds nodded. Frankie Martin, catcher. Found dead in a hotel bathtub 3 weeks ago. Called it a suicide. I call it something else. Mick closed his notebook and stood. Where are you boys off to? Reds asked. Jensen's boarding house, Mick said. If he was being followed, he might have left a note or a trail. Mack stood and tapped his glass. Save our seats, we'll be back. Red smirked. Bring me something juicy. And if you die chasing leads, I'm keeping your hats. Chapter 3. The Trouble with Jolt. Jensen's boarding house, West End, Toronto. The wallpaper peeled in the corners and the floor creaked like a nervous alibi. Jensen's room smelled faintly of hair tonic and liniment. Looked like a man had lived in it, with 1 foot out the door. A travel trunk sat by the dresser, unopened. The closet held 3 pressed shirts, 2 well-worn gloves, a box of chocolate bars that had melted and re-solidified twice. Mick scanned the desk where a pocket-sized devotional book sat next to a pack of gum. Looks like he was keeping the faith, Mack muttered, opening the book. Inside, the center pages had been carved out, neatly, precisely. A hollow the size of a cigarette pack now held something else. A small leather-bound notebook. The kind reporters carried when they didn't want to be overheard. Mick flipped it open. What do you see? Mack asked. Mick frowned. Looks like baseball stats. But they don't make sense. Dates, codes, abbreviations. Top 6, dash 4H, XJ. That's not a box score, it's a cipher. Back at Rosie's, Red's DeLuca was perched in the bar with a Manhattan in one hand and a look of mischief in the other. A notebook, she said, flipping through the pages. Well, this sure ain't poetry. She tilted her head, reading aloud. Aug 12th, ROC, -BUF, B4, 2E, 3-1. This isn't box score material. It's shorthand for bets. I'm betting 3-1 is the odds on the game. You used to date a bookie, didn't you? Mack asked. Reds gave him a withering look. I dated past a bookie. There's a difference. Mick pointed another entry. Look here. Tor-NWK B7 GJ 7-2. That's last night's game. Jensen was tracking games by inning in something called GJ. Reds tapped the page. GJ, guaranteed jump. Slang for a rigged inning. Mick leaned back. He wasn't just keeping track. He was building a case. He was going to blow the whistle, Mack said, on a fixing ring. Reds nodded, and somebody blew the whistle on him first. Their next stop was a dive gym in the East End, where the Newark Bears were taking batting practice indoors before heading back south. Mick and Mack tracked down Eddie Stokes, a rival catcher who'd shared the bench with Jensen years earlier. Jolt, Stokes grunted, pulling off his mitt. Yeah, he was trouble. Always thought he could walk through fire and come out with his hair combed. Did he mention any threats recently? Mick asked. Stokes spat into a garbage can. He's running his mouth about blowing open the biggest scandal since the Black Sox. Told him to keep his head down. He told me he didn't have time. Why not? Mack asked. Because somebody else already died, Stokes said. Frankie Martin, down in Baltimore. Mick nodded. We heard that name. Stokes leaned in. Word is, Jensen found out who was behind it. Said he had proof. Said the guy had fingers in every dugout from Buffalo to Baltimore. Name? Mack asked. Stokes looked around, then lowered his voice. Patches O'Sullivan. Patches O'Sullivan, a name that once made headlines for triples and stolen bases, now floated like smoke through the alleyways of baseball's underbelly. He'd been a golden boy in Toronto 5 years ago. Quick hands, quicker smile, a knack for giving photographers exactly the angle they wanted. Now, word was he traded cleats for cufflinks. The lobby of the King Edward Hotel was cool and quiet as Mick and Mack stepped through the revolving door. A man in a crisp summer suit stood by the grand piano, chatting with two club executives and a cigarette girl who seemed utterly charmed. Gentlemen, said Jack Kent Cook, turning as he spotted the detectives. I was told you'd be dropping by. Cook was young, sharp-eyed, and already carried himself like a man whose name would one day light up headlines. His smile was all polish. His tone had weight beneath it. I'm going to be very clear, he said, walking them into a side room off the lobby. This team has a future. A clean one. There's rot in the foundation. I want it out. Quietly. We're not in the business of cover-ups, Mick said. I'm not asking for one, Cook replied. I'm asking for discretion. You dig up what you need to dig, but let me handle the public side. Mack folded his arms. You know Patches O'Sullivan? Cook's jaw tensed just slightly. He's been sniffing around since spring training. Claims he's writing a book. I don't think he's in it for the literature. Is he betting games? Mick asked. I don't know, but I do know half my players perk up when he walks by, and not because they miss his swing. Cook leaned closer. If Patches has something to do with Jensen's death, I want him gone. But keep me out of the headlines. If we don't clean this up fast, we won't have a team left. Outside, as they stepped in the summer heat, Mack let out a low whistle. Patches O'Sullivan, he said, still flashing those dimples and flashing cash. Charming as ever, Mick replied. I'm starting to wonder how many bodies are buried under that smile. Chapter 4. Bats, Bets, and Bar Tabs. Rosie's Tavern. Late afternoon. The jukebox at Rosie's was playing Billie Holiday low and slow, like she knew someone had just lit a match to something that might burn down half the city. Red's DeLuca was drying glasses with one hand and flipping through the racing form with the other when Mick and Mack returned. You boys ever going to buy a drink or just keep wearing out the floorboards? She asked without looking up. We like your ambiance, Mick said. Mack shrugged. And your pickled eggs. Rez rolled her eyes. I've had quieter courtrooms. She slid a folded scrap of paper across the bar. Heard something you might like. Mick opened it. A name circled in lipstick. Patches O'Sullivan. Beneath it, a note. Placed $3,000 in the Leafs to lose last Friday. Straight through a beard. Odds were 4-1. He's betting big and losing loud, Red said. But not to win money. He's tilting the table. Every time he makes a move, the other bookies scramble, even Manny. Mack leaned in. Manny the Hat Kaufman is letting someone else set the odds? Letting, Red scoffed. He's gritting his teeth so hard he cracked a molar. And if someone's fixing games he ain't in on, he's not going to take it sitting down. Later that evening, somewhere above a butcher shop on Spadina, Manny Kaufman's bookie joint was half smoke, half noise, and entirely illegal. Phones rang in a chorus, chalk dust filled the air like snow, and a guy in a rumpled vest was yelling about a horse that had tripped over its own hooves in the third. Mick and Mack stepped through the haze, dodging a runner carrying a tray of coffee and cigarettes. At the back, beneath a glowing wall board full of scribbled odds, Manny sat behind a desk the size of a battleship. His fedora was perched at a perfect angle. His cigar never left his lips. His pinky ring caught the light every time he made a point. Well, he said, not looking up. If it ain't Toronto's twin terrors. Come to bet the ponies? We came to talk about Jensen, Mick said. The room went quieter than a shut coffin. Manny slowly removed his cigar and blew a perfect ring. Funny. You don't recall Jensen being a racehorse? He was betting baseball, Mack said. And somebody was fixing games under your nose. Manny finally looked up. I run a clean book. You boys know that. Sure, Mick said dryly, just like Reds runs a convent. Manny chuckled without smiling. Don't play cute. You're talking about patches, aren't you? You tell us, Mack said. You look nervous. Manny shifted in his seat. He's been stepping over the foul line, yeah? Placing bets, pushing odds. Sweet talking players like they're dames at the dance hall. He's not running it through me. It makes him either brave or stupid. Maybe both. What's he playing at? Mick asked. Manny leaned forward. You ever played dominoes, McCathie? There's always someone holding back a towel. Patches is that guy. Smiling, charming, but he knows exactly when to drop the piece and knocks everything down. A shout from the next room interrupted them. Schnooky Levine, all nerves and sweat, poked his head in. Boss? You got a call in line 2. Something about the Newark game? Manny waved him off, but Schnooky's eyes darted toward Mick and Mack. When he saw Mack holding Jensen's notebook, his face went pale as pastry dough. Jensen, Schnooky blurted. I don't know nothing about no Jensen. Oh, he said you did, Schnooky, Mack said, grinning. Oh, you're right, of course. He vanished like a magician mid-flub. Mick turned back to Manny. Where would a guy like Patches hide his real operation? Manny reached for his cigar again. Patches loves drama. He'd want a stage. Mick's eyes lit up later that night when a clue dropped in their laps like fate wearing cleats. Back at Jensen's boarding house, buried in a pair of ticket stubs from last week's game, was a second stub for a shipping warehouse on the lakeshore. Stamped with a private event permit. No return address. Just the words. Night game. Lower level. The address led them to a crumbling brick structure near the docks, not far from where the old Toronto ferry used to moor. The windows were blacked out and the steel doors had a chain the size of Mack's arm. On the back was a rusted side entrance, slightly ajar. Mick shone his flashlight into the dark. Warehouse, Mack muttered. Always a warehouse. Yeah, Mick said. But this time, the game's inside. Chapter 5. Curveball in the Dark. Lakeshore Warehouse. Midnight. The moon was a sliver in the lake-winded teeth. Mick and Mack stood in the shadow of the derelict warehouse, flashlights dark, listening. The only sound was a soft slap of water against the dock pylons. And something else. Faint, metallic. Like someone shifting tools or secrets in the dark. Place smells like rope and regret, Mack muttered, pulling a tire iron from under his coat. Mick tested the side door. It groaned open, revealing nothing but black. Let's see what kind of ball game they're playing in here. Inside, the air was stale and dust-choked. A low hum vibrated through the concrete like a radio signal buried beneath static. As they moved past rows of stacked crates, a flicker of light cut through the dark overhead. Dim, electric, and flickering. They stepped into a vast open space and stopped. Mounted against the far wall was an oversized scoreboard, salvaged from an old stadium. The bulbs were wired to a panel with switches and dials. On the wall next to it, a chalkboard scrawled with odds, inning markers, and strange initials. Looks like the real game's being played off the field, Mick said. Mack pointed to a metal box on the floor wired to a row of phones. Calling plays before they happen. Betting outcomes like clockwork. Or like a script, Mick added. He ran a gloved hand over the scoreboard's controls. Look here. Manual triggers for hit, error, strikeout. This isn't for display. It's a signal system. Suddenly a noise. Footsteps. Fast, close. Back door, Mack shouted, bolting after a fleeing shadow. Mick followed, boots hammering the concrete. They turned the corner and tackled the runner just before he hit the alley. The figure hit the ground hard, groaning. Don't shoot, I didn't do nothing, he cried. They rolled him over and stopped cold. It was the Leafs' third baseman. Red face bruised and sweating through his collar. What are you doing here, Tommy? Mick asked, kneeling beside him. I got a message. Said to come down here. Said if I didn't drop that fly ball tomorrow, they'd tell the press I was in on the fix. Are you? Mack asked. No, I swear. They got something on me. Pictures, maybe. I never. Jensen said he was going to stop it. Said he had names. Then he buried his face in his hands. I didn't think it'd go this far. Mack looked up at Mick. He's spooked. Yeah, Mick said. But spooked men make mistakes, like running straight into a trap. The warehouse door suddenly screeched open behind them. A battered delivery truck roared in, headlights flaring. Skidded to a halt and out hopped Red's DeLuca, trenchcoat flying, hair pinned up like a starlet caught mid-stunt. You boys always get the fun job, she said, slamming the truck door. Red's, Mack blinked. Where in blazes did you get a truck? Borrowed it, she said, brushing dust from her skirt. The baker won't miss it till sunrise. Was telling a guy left my tavern wearing cologne that cost more than my rent. Followed him here, saw your shadows, and figured I'd crash the party. She stepped over to the third baseman and raised an eyebrow. This your big catch? Big enough to squeal, Mick said, if we lean hard enough. They went back inside to search the office space behind the scoreboard. Mack kicked open a rusted locker. Inside, an envelope of cash, a half-empty flask, a small caliber pistol, neatly wrapped in a handkerchief. Reds reached for it with a gloved hand. Well. Mick took it gently, holding it to the light. The metal gleamed faintly, and on the grip, faint residue. Smells like almonds, he muttered. Cyanide compound, Mack said. Same stuff Kendall found in Jensen's blood. Well, Red said, leaning against the wall. Looks like this little ball game just turned deadly. Chapter 6. Out at Home. Maple Leaf Stadium, 2 days later. The sun was high, the seats were packed, and the whole city buzzed like a live wire. You could feel in the breeze off the lake, and the creak of the bleachers, and the way even the pigeons seemed to be holding their breath. The Leafs are back on the field for a doubleheader. Newark again. Deja vu with a crowd twice as large and whispers thick as cigar smoke. Something's going down. In the press box above third base, Mick adjusted his binoculars. You see him? Yep, Mack said, peering through opera glasses he borrowed from Reds. Floral motif, just to make a statement. Private suite, 4 rows up from the executive box, smiling like he just bought the winning ticket to the World Series. Patches O'Sullivan sat in a cream suit that belonged in Havana and a tie that sparkled in the sun. His hair was slicked back like a movie star, his feet rested on the rail, and in his right hand, opera glasses of his own. He wasn't watching the game. He was watching the dugout. Watch his hands, Mick murmured. Mack did. Nose tap, sleeve tug, hat tilt. Each gesture smooth, deliberate. Exactly the kind of coded signs a third base coach might use. Except Patches wasn't coaching. He was conducting. Bottom of the fifth, Mick muttered. Watch the batboy. Down the field, the batboy, a wiry teenager with more nerves and coordination, was watching Patches like a hawk. Each time the ex-ballplayer made a move, the boy responded, shuffling to the back wrap, swapping out gum wrappers, brushing dirt from the cleats of the catcher. Those aren't chores, Mack said. They're cues. Someone's about to strike out in the worst way, Mick replied. Across the stadium, Jack Kent Cook stepped on the field, flanked by 2 photographers and a man with a notepad. Gentleman, Cook announced, waving to the crowd with theatrical bravado. A moment of appreciation for our fans. Today's game is dedicated to you. As the stadium erupted in applause, Cook winked at the press. Be sure to mention the new uniforms in tomorrow's edition. Behind the scenes, the distraction worked like a charm. Chief Stewart, dressed like a team exec and flanked by plainclothes officers, slipped into the executive suite levels. Mick gave him a subtle nod from the press box. Stewart nodded back. Showtime, Mack muttered. Just then, movement. The batboy was bolting. He dropped the gum bucket, knocked over a towel rack, and made a break for the player's exit. He's running, Mick said. Let's go. Mack kicked the press box door open and they tore down the corridor. Someone beat them to the punch. Out on Stadium Road, just beyond the player's gate, a truck screeched sideways into view, kiting the fleeing batboy off with a tire squealing turn so sharp it left scorch marks on the asphalt. Red's DeLuca leaned out the window, hairpin back, lipstick flawless, trenchcoat flaring behind her. Nobody outruns a DeLuca, she said, slamming the door open and stepping out like a movie finale. The batboy skidded to a halt, mouth open. I was just... Oh, sweetie, Red said, grabbing him by the collar and spinning toward the arriving detectives. Save it for the boys in blue. Mick and Mack caught up as the sirens arrived and Stewart took the kid into custody. He's the errand boy, Mack said. Pass Jensen the poison gum. Follow Patch's signals. And now, Mick added, watching as the crowd cheered another play, completely unaware of the drama above, he just struck out. Chapter 7. Bottom of the ninth. Toronto Police Headquarters. The next morning. The batboy sat in the interrogation room like a towel left in the rain, soaked, wrung out, and unraveling by the minute. His eyes were red, his hands trembled in his lap. He looked up as Mick entered the room, flanked by Chief Stewart and Mack with a thermos of Dr. Kendall's terrible coffee. I didn't mean to hurt nobody, the boy mumbled. You handle the man a piece of gum laced with cyanide, Stewart said evenly. Start talking. The kid cracked like old wood. Patches, he whispered. Patches paid me. Told me it was just to make Jensen sick, enough to scratch him from the lineup. Said it'd wear off. And the signals, Mick asked? The batboy nodded. Show me what to look for. If he touched his nose, I was supposed to give the catcher a mint stick instead of gum. He rubbed his sleeve. I gave the pitcher the loaded rosin bag. He had a dozen of them. Mack leaned forward. What about the scoreboard rig down the docks? I never saw that, the boy said. But I knew he was running something big. Guys were suddenly making errors at just the right time. The scores, he had them all before the game started. By noon, the third baseman was in the next room with a lawyer and a conscience about ready to burst. When Mick and Mack entered, he barely let them sit down. Yeah, I talked to Patches, he said. I made a few bad throws, missed signs. He paid me. But I didn't poison Jensen. Jensen was going to blow the whistle, Mick said, and Patches needed to shut him up. The third baseman dropped his head into his hands. Jensen was scared. Said he was going to go to the press, that he had names, notebooks, everything. He told me to get clear of it. I didn't listen. He looked up at Mick. I didn't kill him. I didn't save him either. Later that evening in the executive lounge of the King Edward Hotel, Patches O'Sullivan was finally cornered, cuffed, calm, and charming as ever. "Well," he said with a smile as Mick and Mack stepped into the room, "you boys play a hell of a long game." Chief Stewart read him his rights. Patches barely blinked. Instead, he turned his head toward the door where Red's DeLuca stood, arms crossed, trench coat draped over one shoulder. "I always admired a woman with timing," he said with a wink. "You're about to admire the inside of a holding cell," Red shot back, lighting his cigarette with flair. "Try not to fix the card games while you're in there." As he was led away, Patches called over his shoulder, "Tell the boys in the dugout I'll be back by spring." "Maybe," Mack muttered. "He starts a league in Kingston Pen." Outside, under the soft glow of the marquee lights, Jack Kent Cook leaned against the frame of his Packard, waiting for them. "You did good work," he said quietly. "Quiet, clean, as much as anything like this can be." "We don't do spin," Mick said, "but we don't like headlines either." Cook nodded. "This game, it deserves better than rigged plays and backroom odds. I intend to give it better. For the city, for the fans." "For Jensen?" Mack asked. Cook hesitated and nodded once. "Yeah, for Jensen." He shook their hands. "If you ever want season tickets, just say the word." "We prefer box seats in murder cases," Mick said. As they walked away, Mack popped a stick of gum into his mouth and stopped. Pulled it out, stared at it, and tossed it in the gutter. "All I know is," he said, "I'm never chewing gum again." Mick smirked. "Just don't forget the signal before you do." They turned down the street together, the glow of the stadium still lingering behind them, like the final note of a favorite song. This has been another episode of the Mick and Mack Mysteries, only on Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. Stay tuned for more tales of murder, mischief, and mystery, straight from the streets of post-war Toronto.